Hello and welcome, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Crash, and today we're here to give you 5 horror manga recommendations. But this video is going to be slightly different since I have a very special guest. This guy is known by many names. Some call him that one dude from Street Fighter, some call him the best roguelike game of recent times. And when I said to a friend I was doing a collab with him, my friend legit said, "Who's that? A wrestler?" It's the Masked Man. Masked, how are you?
I'm great. Thank you for having me on.
Right.
Appreciate it.
So yeah, what we're gonna be doing is just dropping some recommendations on horror manga for Halloween. And since you had 2 of them, right, I'm gonna go first. The first one I have is called BioMeat Nectar. There's a lot of styles of horror, I feel, but this manga really calls back to the B horror movies of like the 80s. It's kind of like those cheesy, gore fests. Yeah, basically it's that in manga form. So this is a story about Japan in the future of, I think it was the future of 2002, because it's like a 90s manga, where the government of Japan invented some monsters that can pretty much eat anything except metal and glass. And so the idea is that they basically can eliminate pollution because they eat plastic and all the garbage. And at the same time, they taste decently well, so it can serve as a food resource, a very cheap food resource that people, poor people can buy and eat. So that's essentially the premise of the story, except like the monsters, since they eat everything, what happens is when they get released, which eventually they do, because it is that kind of manga, they will just eat pretty much every human that they see. And so that's basically the point. We follow 4 kids who, after an earthquake, their city gets basically just invaded by these creatures, which are called biomeats, and they just start eating everyone. And the cool thing about this manga, in my opinion, is that it not only is that this one particular story, it also does one thing that B horror movies and horror movies in general do, which is to have sequels. So this manga, even though it is a full manga, just one manga with around 12 volumes, we follow these characters over 3 scenarios as they grow from middle schools in the first part to teenagers in the second to adults in the final arc. And each of these arcs kind of feels like a horror movie by itself, kind of like the sequel of the previous, which I think it's pretty cool. And I just think that for people who like that kind of horror, there's not many good manga, that can call back to those kind of horror movies. And if you enjoy those, I think BioMeat Nectar is one that you should check out at the very least.
All right. I guess then I'll jump in right into my recommendation. I'll get the first one out of the way because it should be pretty short and simple. It's Hideout. Now, I haven't read it, and you might be wondering, Mast, how can you recommend a manga you haven't read? Well, I'm really familiar with the author's other works, Green Blood, Bestarius, if I'm not mistaken, and Rainbow, and I love all 3 of those manga, especially Green Blood, and even more especially, I don't know if that's proper English, it doesn't matter, Rainbow. But Hideout, I've seen like pieces of artwork from it, and it looks absolutely stellar, at least from a visual standpoint. So that's a manga that I do plan on reading this month. So this time I'm giving you all a bit of a heads up, so y'all can read it before I read it and then recommend it, so you don't have too much on your to read list. But yeah, Hideout is one that I would recommend, that I've heard a lot of good things of in terms of an actual horror manga. So yeah, that would be my first recommendation.
Yeah, I haven't read Hideout either, but I've read Green Blood, and yeah, the art style of that manga is just mind-blowing. It's still, to me, one of the best art styles I've ever seen in any manga ever. So, if it is a horror manga with that style, it should be pretty good. But yeah, my second recommendation is a manga called Children, and I'm gonna just say that it's not for the faint-hearted because it's a horror manga called Children. It's a horror manga with a bunch of gore called Children.
Right.
It is very much a story of kind of like this teenager who was sent to this place in the woods where a bunch of children live in, kind of like an orphanage, where the oldest one, which is the one who takes care of all these younger children, is like 14 years old, and everything looks fine until it comes time to I mean, that's when it comes time to dinner, but they eat and everything, and then afterwards, the main character realizes that these kids are basically killing adults and just eating them. And yeah, it sounds pretty much like again a cheesy horror, but it's very interesting to see these young kids because they aren't just like your traditional evil kids from horror movies. They have some reasons as to why they're doing that, and they behave a lot like children a lot of the time, at least. So it's really interesting when the main character starts to interact with them, starts to learn more about these characters while they're just going around killing people and then acting like 6, 7, 8 years old. So that's pretty cool. And there's I'm not gonna mention it or gonna spoil it, of course, but there's a pretty cool plot twist at the end of the manga. And yeah, it's a very short manga. It's 2 volumes, and the art style is amazing. The gore is very, very hard to swallow sometimes, so have that in mind. But one of the things I really like about this manga is the eyes of the kids, because they're generally just like these big ass, most of the times like dead eyes. But sometimes when it comes to look shocked or things like that, the art style in the eyes really sells what's happening in the manga. So yeah, that is my second recommendation.
So, this is the only other recommendation I had because I haven't read the most horror stuff, although stuff like Alice in Borderlands, could technically be considered horror and other things, admits that. But, I'm gonna go with No Longer Human. Now, there's technically 3 versions. There's the original written by Osamu Dazai, but in terms of manga, you have the Furuya version and then you have the Junji Ito one. Now, even though I think the Junji Ito one is solid, both of them are relatively short. I prefer the Furuya version as I think it goes a little more extensive into the character and making it feel a lot more immersive of an experience versus in Junji Ito. It would be like if somebody was telling me a horror story by a campfire, and I think Junji Ito has a lot better works within the horror, I guess, genre, if one could say that. So all respects to Junji Ito, but with the Furuya version, you really get a look into this character who I think is kind of like the Osamu Dazai's telling of himself, but with this interpretation of Furuya. And you get this kid who grows up. And from what I remember from reading both versions and the distinct differences is in the Junji Ito version, you see this kid, the main character of the story, growing up, and he's an absolute piece of crap. Like he's despicable, and you don't feel any sympathy for him. Versus in the Furuya version, you start feeling the sympathy for this kid who grows up and goes through certain things. Although it happens in the Junji Ito version as well, but this character goes through things that leaves him detached from other people, from life, and the depiction of like this empty puppet shell um that's hollow, and kind of really representing the title of No Longer Human. And even though I think again Junji Ito's delves a little more into the horror aspect, I think both regardless give you this really creepy sense of yourself and what it means to be a person, and really questioning sometimes the inner thoughts you have in your mind. And I think where the story can go and where it can take you is scary enough, let alone without all the insane horror depictions from an illustrative standpoint. So I think if you're really interested in kind of like a psychological horror, then that's really what No Longer Human is. So I would recommend that for sure.
Yeah, I like I've read the first. Sorry, not the first. I've read the Junji Ito
Oh.
one, only the start of it, and yeah, it. I need to read the Furuya. It really seems like the most interesting one because, as far as I know, Junji Ito is basically just using his own visuals to retell the story of the actual book, right? And Furuya does his own version. So, but yeah, it is one
Right,
that
right.
really looks very interesting to me.
Well, they both go by like their own interpretation. I can't say because I haven't read the original by Osamu Dazai. I don't know if I mentally want to. Uh, so
Yeah.
it's like I can't really say how accurate both of them are and faithful to the original. Although I'm pretty sure No Longer Human is a bit of autobiographical for Osamu Dazai because I've checked into Osamu Dazai's story and it's pretty wild. Like some of the stuff that happens in that manga, if I'm not mistaken, is stuff that Osamu Dazai actually went through, and did, especially when it comes to like the double suicide attempts and stuff like that. So, pretty heavy, pretty heavy. But yeah, this not for the faint of heart either.
Yeah, I've heard about that. That yeah, that a lot of it is, if not autobiographical, at least inspired by his own experiences.
Right, right.
Yeah, and so the final recommendation that I have is Franken Fran, which I'm not sure if I've talked on the channel. I at least talked on a video with Doofy on Doofy's channel, which is kind of like, to me, Franken Fran is a manga that you may want to check out if you are curious about Hero Guru manga, but you really don't want to get into Hero Guru manga because it has all the interesting parts of Hero Guru, all of those. Because I feel like Hero Guru is very unique. Not all, it's generally not good, but it's generally very unique in the way that it represents gore and sexuality and the human mind. It generally goes far beyond what normal manga tend to do. And I feel like Franken Fran does that to a degree, and it also is pretty gory, but not, at least doesn't have the hero part of Hirokuro, where it doesn't have anything like very sexualized or anything like that. So basically, the story of Franken Fran is this surgeon monster thingy called Fran. That basically she can make anything happen if you ask her. Each chapter, because this is very episodical, each chapter goes with someone asking her to do something, like a request. Generally, it's a ill-intended request, and then she very naively accepts to do it, and she just happens to fuck up whatever the guy asks. And it's not because she's evil or anything. It's just because she doesn't really know what is good, what is not, what's the limits of what she could do or should do, so to speak. And she just happens to make all these clients like monsters and misinterpret the what they want to do. It's really fun. It's much more of a dark comedy, full of gore,
Right.
than just a horror manga, so to speak.
Right.
But
I think
yeah,
My bad, not to interrupt, but I think one of the interesting things about when you talk about horror, and personally for me, is like jump scares are kind of difficult to pull off in a manga. Although you could be very grotesque and like really gross out the reader, which a lot of manga I think do, in certain regards. I think it's really special to like provide an experience that like kind of stays with you, like that eerie sense of like I don't want to read that,
yeah,
I don't want to think about it. I think that's a much more effective way, especially in the medium of manga, because you can't really use like loud noises. And even then, like I think jump scares in and of themselves are pretty cheap. Like I think if you look at some of the best like horror games, for example, I was watching a video on Dead Space, and it was really talking about it's not just like the jump scares, it's the presentation, it's the build up, it's all the quiet moments, that give you a false sense of security. So, just an observation I'm throwing out there in regards to the medium of horror, and what you do regarding that.
no, I completely agree with you. And yeah, well, one of my favorite games in horror game is Silent Hill 2, which has some jump scares here and there, but mostly the horror comes from the fact that they tell you that the monsters are there, and you can't see them, but you know they are there, and you don't need to fight them. You can run past them, but it just the fact that they make a noise and it's very unsettling and very disturbing, and you don't want to hear it. So the only two options you have to do is either go against the monster and try to shut it out, or just run away. Really makes the
Right.
experience very unnerving. And of course,
Right.
Silent Hill 2, I'm not sure if you've ever played it or if you know too much
Not
about it.
much of a video game guy. Like I'm familiar with a lot of games, but I don't ever really play a lot of them.
Yeah, and it's an old game by now. It's kind of hard to get a copy, I feel. But
Gosh.
if you ever get to play it, I think you'll like it because besides the horror of actually playing the game and the monsters and the fog, there's a really good story of just this guy who got a letter from his dead wife saying that she would be in Silent Hill, and there's all this story about why his wife died and how he feels guilty about it and how he dealt with it, and all of it explored throughout the city of Silent Hill. Throughout, even the monsters that appear are somewhat related with his own psyche, because the city does that. It's part of the canon. It's very interesting.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, that's a sixth recommendation.
Yeah.
Gaming format. But yeah, I think that's the 5 ones that I wanted to talk about. Yeah, not sure if you want to add anything else.
Nah, other
No.
than thank you for having me on the video so much. It's always a pleasure. And if y'all haven't subscribed to this channel, make sure y'all subscribe and like and watch his other stuff. Great guy.
Yeah, thank you, and thanks for accepting, because you know, I didn't know if you were going to accept or not, but
Anytime.
yeah, thank you. And if by any chance some of you, you know, like manga and like YouTube and came across me and you don't know who Masked Man is, he's not a wrestler. He does manga videos in his channel.
Yo, I wish I was a wrestler. Oh my gosh, my intros would go nuts. I would be
Yeah.
so over the top and cinematic with them. Oh, sorry.
No, it's all good. And yeah, that's it. I'm probably gonna put a video on the left, horror about another horror manga that you can check out, and there's gonna probably be a video on the right as well that you can click on. I don't know. But yeah, that is all. If you watched it till here, thank you very much, and I'll see you next video.